Welcome to the Wealth Stream Podcast. The team at Hightower Great Lakes share their insights and passions for empowering their clients to live their best life. In this energetic podcast, we will take you on a journey to help you navigate your financial future, overcome life's challenges to reach your financial goals, and find the financial clarity you've been searching for. Let's explore the downstream impact of your wealth and what it means to you, your family, and your community to live greater.
Hello and welcome to the Wealth Stream with Tim Scannell from Hightower Great Lakes. Tim, how are you?
You know what? I'm doing great today. It's spring and no complaints. Happy as can be.
Yeah, I'm happy to be back with you. I'm excited about your topic today. I know that you've spoken about consulting before as something that your clients have considered, but today's podcast you're really focusing on that, and I love the title. So you want to be a consultant? Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So one of the things I talk to clients about a lot, especially business owners, is working on a parallel path while they're preparing their exit, even well before the exit, making sure that they can get off one escalator and get on another. And that the new one they're getting onto, you don't want to start thinking about it after you retire or after you exit. You want to really plan for it. Like I said, a parallel path as you're going down the exit process. And there's a lot to consider, but I always joke and I say, look, you just need to be talking to people and challenging your brain and, doing something you really love. We've done a few podcasts, the Passion series, hopefully they're exiting to create that parallel path to do something that they're really passionate about. But oftentimes I get clients will say, well, I'm thinking of getting into consulting. I've built up this expertise, this industry knowledge, this unique perspective, experience, et cetera. And I think I can give a lot back, so sometimes we talk about maybe writing a book. And I do have a couple of clients who are working on that. And actually a couple of clients who have done that. And sometimes we talk about public speaking, maybe you get on they call it the mashed potato circuit, right? You get your profile out there and you start talking and you get good at it. But a number of, I would say more and more, I have a number of clients asking or just saying that they would like to get into consulting. And so I have kind of a checklist or, something that I usually go through an outline that I talk to clients about. So I thought I would cover that today to give the listeners just something to think about if consulting is one of the things they want to do when they exit to their full life, their next life.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go through it because I'm curious what's on your list.
So the number one, I always kind of pull the Band-Aid off, tax liabilities. And again, I'm a recovering accountant. But what I find is that this is where people stumble the most, especially if you've been working with a company where you've got, HR doing this and payroll and, different people in your organization doing different things. You probably never thought about taxes other than writing that check at the end of the year or making quarterly estimated payments. But where I see the number one, the biggest problem I see after people get into the business or get into consulting is that they are now responsible for, paying taxes and tracking taxes, and it's expensive, not to get too into the details, but when you work as an employee, you're, for example, Social Security, Medicare, you're paying half of that cost, and then the employer, your company's paying the other half. But when you are a consultant, you're paying the full amount. So just right off the bat, on any profits, you're going to pay about 13% just in payroll taxes plus state tax, federal tax. So oftentimes we're telling them that, really you got to set aside 40-45%, and it's a bit of a shocker. So, but the other reason why I talk about tax liabilities is because oftentimes clients who are getting into consulting have never thought about pricing. How do I actually price this? And, what's my hourly rate, or what kind of retainer do I set? And you need to build in taxes as part of that. So if you feel like you need to be making X amount per hour, you got to factor in, you got to gross it up for taxes. So there's a couple of reasons why I talk about that first, not just because I'm an accountant, but because I think it's a big part of the pricing, big part of the business plan. And it's where people get in trouble if they don't set aside enough, afterwards. So get right into tax liabilities is one of the things I talk about.
Yeah, well, that makes sense because I think that's the scariest thing, right? Of going out on your own. not knowing that stuff, if you don't have somebody that you've already got in place that's going to do it for you and handle all that, it's a lot to think about.
Yeah, two of my kids are basically self-employed. One's in acting, the other's in animation. In the first year, they went out and they're on their own. I even gave them that talk. I'm like, look, set aside the money. And of course, I'm not going to make public knowledge that neither of them did, but it creates a problem. So I just always want to make people aware of it.
Yeah, and I'm assuming that when you sat down and said, let's have the talk, they're like, wait, Dad, come on.
Exactly, not that talk.
We've already had that talk. Yeah,
that's right. We're out of college. Come on. Then the second topic I always bring up, and again, it's just me being the risk manager, making sure that they're not going to get themselves in trouble, is insurance. Again, people think, well, I'm going to get into consulting. Why do I need insurance? And what I mean by insurance is really, let's talk about, first of all, health insurance. How are you going to, are you going to need that? Are we going to run it through the company? But where I really get into is more any sort of liability. So if you're out there offering your expertise, offering your knowledge, sometimes there could be liability. You want to make sure you're giving good advice as opposed to just general stuff. And so we talk about, business structure, how do we set it up, but also how do we insure or risk manage so that you're not assuming more liability that jeopardizes maybe the plans you have in place with your other part of your life.
Yeah. And that's something I had never really thought about, was liabilities. Is it like E&O insurance? Is that what you're talking about?
Exactly. So directors and officers, errors and omissions.
Okay.
And oftentimes it's not even an issue. It just depends on the topic, depend on that expertise. So if you have a client who's, neurologist and he's out there talking about the brain, there's going to be a little more liability or things you have to worry about as opposed to, an accountant talking about taxes.
Yeah. Yep. That makes sense.
And then the other thing we talk about is retirement planning. So oftentimes through the company, as people are exiting, they're participating in their own 401k, profit sharing, things like that. And there's a lot of restrictions on what highly compensated or owners can receive in traditional company-owned, company-sponsored retirement plans. So if I, for example, I'm the owner, there's limitations on what I can contribute to myself without contributing to all my employees. So oftentimes they're used to but contributing the traditional retirement plan accounts. And when they become consultants, we could actually put a lot more away in a tax deducted 401k profit sharing. I did a podcast in the past, it was probably about a year and a half ago, on cash balance plans. But the point is that there's a lot more flexibility and there's a much greater ability to shelter more money. So when we're putting together a financial plan as they exit, there's so many parts to the puzzle. And one of the parts is how much, if any, would they like to, defer or shelter as they're getting into their consulting business compared to maybe, operating expenses and things like that. So it's a really big part of the equation. Oftentimes people aren't aware of it, but there's some really great advantages when you're consulting and you're the sole proprietor, sole employee. You can really shelter a lot of money.
All right.
And then the next thing we talk about kind of on the checklist, and it relates to retirement planning, is planning for like the future transition creation of the business, cash flow. How much money are you going to need up front? Are you going to need an office? Are you going to, in this virtual world, should we plan for setting up computers, technology? What kind of Wi-Fi, just, things like that. And where's your office going to be? In the past, maybe where you were located in wherever your company was located, you were restricted to that state tax, situation. But oftentimes if you're in consulting, maybe you have the flexibility or the options to maybe look at other states where the taxes are less. But the big thing is you're focusing on, we're putting together a cash flow plan because sometimes there is a lot of startup cost. Oftentimes there's not, in which case then we just need to forecast putting the cash flow from the business into their overall plan. So we focus on cash needs up front, cash needs going forward, and then maybe how that impacts their ability to maintain their the retirement plan or the exit plan that we put together.
Yeah, that's interesting. You have an exit plan for the first part, and then I'm assuming you kind of branch into an exit plan for the second part as well, if they decide to wind it down.
Yeah, I mean, I have one client in particular who had looked at setting up a consulting firm, and it also identified a couple people that he wanted to bring on board as employees. So we talked about that. We talked about the need for, facilities. Where are you going to house them? How are you going to do that? We talked about the need for payroll. What are you going to have to pay these people to retain them? And when we looked at the numbers, we came up with kind of the forecast. He quickly kind of pivoted and, didn't want to allocate so much of the proceeds from the sale of his business towards that, and instead kind of decided to do it maybe piecemeal, do it on his own, work with contractors instead of employees, work relatively remote instead of, setting up a really big office. Because, you sign a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year lease, and you're really committed before you really know what you want to do. I mean, oftentimes I think people think they want to be doing something when they exit, but they find out maybe a year or two into it that, or even sooner, that it's not what they thought or not what they really want.
Yeah.
So we try as much as possible to keep the flexibility into the plan, as opposed to locking into, big cash flow outlays or big commitments to leases, things like that.
Yeah, no, I think that's excellent.
And then the next area we talk about is, I call it charitable or philanthropic, but oftentimes when people are exiting the business, and for whatever reason, a larger than not percentage of our current client base has the desire to give back, philanthropic intent, etc. So one of the things we put on our checklist to talk about is, well, how are you going to, if at all, incorporate, some of the passions you have about nonprofits that you favor into your business plan? Will it involve, pro bono work? Will it involve, making sure that a certain portion of your business is consulting to and with some of these nonprofits? Or maybe you're just going to keep it completely separate. But the key is that we want to make sure that we have a plan up front, because what happens also is when you've been the CEO, the manager, the founder, the owner of a business, and you exit, not surprisingly, you will be contacted fairly often by a number of nonprofits looking for contributions. And the better you have formulated or your plan in advance of being contacted, before you exit, after you exit, and then when you're running your consulting firm and you're, joining your local chambers or you're marketing yourself, you're going to be contacted. So you just want to make sure you have a plan in place to to respond. That's all. So oftentimes they're not prepared for the amount of solicitation they might get. So we always want to make sure that they're prepared for that and it's part of their plan.
That is something I had never thought of before, honestly. I mean, it makes perfect sense because you see the sale of a business and it's pretty easy to find out who the owner was. And, charities are going to do what charities are going to do, which is a good thing. They need to try to drum up business and get donations. But I never thought of that before when somebody sells a business, that they would be, I don't want to say targeted, but solicited, like you said.
Yeah, they're definitely on the radar.
They're on the
exactly.
radar. There you go.
Yes.
Thank you. That's what
right.
I was looking for.
That's right.
Yeah. Huh. Interesting.
And then the next part of it too is once we've kind of gotten this far down the path, we talk about, what financial professionals do you need on your team? So we've done a number of podcasts in the past talking about like Team Eric, right? Eric is planning for this transition. He's, you're thinking of getting into consulting or some other thing that's following your passion. And it requires a different set of professionals, maybe different skill sets that you needed when you were running the business, growing the business, preparing for exit versus now, going into this consulting mode. And so we want to make sure that you have the right team on board. So for example, the attorney you might have used with your business might have been more contract focused. Maybe you're a contractor where much of the work that they were doing for you was, helping you set up contracts, helping you chase money when people don't pay. That attorney's skill set is not the same skill set you're going to need when you're setting up the new entity. Let's say your consulting firm or you're putting together your marketing materials. Let's say you're writing a book or you've got things that have intellectual property. You're going to need different attorneys with different skills. So we always just want to make sure that we identify who they're going to need so that they make sure that they get those resources up front rather than have problems in the future. And then part of that too is, getting into estate planning. So if you're going to be a consultant, are you going to set up a limited liability corp? Are you going to be a sole proprietor? are there asset protection needs? And how does all of that integrate with your current estate plan? If something happens to you, you don't want to leave a lot of loose ends so that your beneficiaries, your partner, your spouse, whoever has to deal with it all. So you want to make sure that all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted, and it gets to, making sure that the attorney's involved up front. But it typically always affects the estate plan. So we want to make sure that that's part of it.
Yeah. Again, I think that's part of what you do at the beginning with anybody. So if they've been working with you for any amount of time, I think it'd be pretty easy to take a look at all that and just pivot, right?
That's right. And then the final one, but I think it's probably most important, is Plan B. So I recently did a podcast with Stuart McMillan, and if you're out there listening, it's a great 2-part podcast that this is somebody who really grew an amazing business, second generation, grew the family business, and then exited to his incredible passions. And, one of the things that his core advisor, who I do a lot of work with, his attorney, John Wichter, was, what's your plan B? Because what you think you might want to do while you're exiting compared to what you think you want to do 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years out, it's going to be different. And you may want to be a consultant. You may want to write a book. You may want to do public speaking. You may want to start your next business venture. It's just really hard to really know until you dive into it. So you always want to think of Plan B. If I don't want to be a consultant, how do I unwind it? How do we get out of this without incurring, too many commitments, too much liability, too much expense, et cetera. So Plan B is something that I always talk about. I talk about it while the client's running the parallel path before they exit. I talk about it even more post-exit, because you don't want to get married to something, some plan that you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm a prisoner now and I can't get out. So you want to walk into it. And I've had other advisors tell me that, walking into something with a Plan B is not a good way to walk into something, because you're not fully committed. But I would say you're fully committed to the plan, but it's impossible to really know what your life is going to look like post-exit until you actually go through it. And anyone who's exited will tell you that.
Yeah. Well, Tim, I think back to 2020. That was something where, you spoke a little bit about not necessarily this exact topic, but other business owners that were ready to say, you know what, I'm done. I think I'm done right now. They saw what was going on in the world, and it was difficult. And there were a lot of people that just said, you know what, it's I think I'm done. And I know that a lot of advisors did that. You didn't, thankfully. That's why we're still here. But right. A lot of advisors were like, wow, this is something I think I'm done now. And they wanted to fold up shop. But something like that could happen. The pandemic could happen, or any number of things. Good things could happen in your life too. All of a sudden you have, 3 or 4 grandkids that wow, they just quintuplets or whatever that is.
Yeah, exactly.
Now I want to spend more time with them. So I think a Plan B is fantastic. And I wanted to ask you, looking at all these different things, when you speak to your clients about that, and I know that you kind of touched a little bit on cash flow, but how much are you, and I guess after somebody retires, every plan could be different when it comes to the cost involved. But what are you talking to your clients about as far as their commitment level to their next plan? How much of their resources are you helping them be comfortable with committing to this, as opposed to, let's commit to Plan B, or let's commit to this next stage of your life. However, let's make sure that it still fits within the plan of your overall happiness for the rest of your retirement as well.
Yeah. And I'll say that I have more and more clients who are talking about consulting. And I would say of all the ones who have talked about it pre-exit, who, started working on that, maybe a third of them are actually doing it. And I will say that my experience so far has been that clients considering it, they're not overcommitting resources. They're not overcommitting time to the plan. In other words, if anything, like one of the issues about being self-employed is accounting, right? I've had more people who hate accounting try to learn QuickBooks, so that they can be a consultant and not have to hire somebody, if anything, in general, my experience has been that when people retire, when people exit, they've spent their whole life saving, accumulating, growing. And the psychology of post-exit, where now this is what you have, this is what you need to protect, this is what you need, you and your family, your beneficiaries, your charities need to fulfill your goals. There's a hesitation to even spend anything. People become, I always tell people that it takes a year or two to really get comfortable with the psychology, a change of living off money versus accumulating and growing. So when I talk to people about this and getting in a consultant, I'm actually trying to convince them to really be aware of what commitments they need to make it happen, because they tend to undercommit as opposed to overcommit.
Got it. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, like even just when they're setting up a consulting firm and they have an LLC or an entity set up, getting them to fund it so that, because it takes a while to start generating cash flow, right? So, and then when business starts to generate, it's sporadic, keep, like we talked about before, setting money aside for taxes, recording everything. If anything, the other question I get from most of my clients considering this is, can I deduct everything now, right? Because as an employee, the way the tax code works is really there's very little tax planning that you can do. You get your W-2, you make your retirement plan contribution, mortgage interest is restricted, property taxes, all the itemized deductions have been restricted dramatically. So there's very little tax planning. So when you're consulting and self-employed or have an entity, can I deduct my house? Can I go take my wife to Hawaii and deduct that? So if anything, we're tempering that part too, to say, well, we really need to follow the tax code, and follow it to the letter and get the professionals involved, et cetera. But to get to your question, the common, what I've experienced is that people don't want to commit enough, I think, to make it work, if that's what they actually want to do. So we're trying to make them aware of really what's involved and what kind of commitment it'll be. And if they do jump into it, just making sure that they make the full commitment to it.
Yeah. And bottom line is, get a client in Hawaii. And then
exactly.
Then that works, right? Something like that. I'm not giving you tax advice. It's not.
No, but I mean, that is accurate, So if you have a client down in Houston, Texas, you can go see that person. Your spouse or partner can come with you. You can't deduct that portion. Just to be clear, but there are things you can do to, help minimize taxes within the IRS code. So,
unless your spouse is part of the business, right? Because
man, now you're offering tax advice.
Okay, no, I'm not saying that. I didn't say that out loud, did I?
No, I'm just joking. Yeah.
Oh, but there's all sorts of questions, Tim, and I know that people will have questions after this. Let's give them your contact info because you've got the answers.
Perfect. No, and if people want to reach out to me, I've done this dozens of times. I help business owners every day build successful exit plans, and oftentimes this is part of it. So reach out to me, send me an email at tscannell send me an email at tscannell@hightoweradvisors.com, or, call my office, call me at 219-531-4941. And I'm glad to, send you some of our checklists, help you plan, or if interested, schedule a, build your exit meeting.
Fantastic. Tim, thank you so much. This is a great podcast.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. This is something we get a lot. So I just thought I'd make the listeners aware of the services and the things they need to think about.
All right. Sounds good. And speaking about the listeners, thank you so much for tuning in and listening to the WealthStream Podcast with Tim Scannell. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Tim comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This also makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your friends and family. Again, thank you so much for listening today. For everyone at Hightower Great Lakes, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the WealthStream Podcast. We hope you gained some valuable insight that you can apply to your life and share with others. Please don't forget to subscribe below to be notified when new episodes become available. And don't forget to live greater. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Hightower Great Lakes. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning. Hightower Great Lakes is a group of investment professionals registered with Hightower Securities LLC, member FINRA and SIPC, and with Hightower Advisors LLC, a registered investment advisor with the SEC. Securities are offered through Hightower Securities LLC. Advisory services are offered through Hightower Advisors LLC.